Hey there! Thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and welcome to yet another episode of BIONICLE Fanon Reviews, where I review fan-created Bionicle models that cannot support the weight of their own bodies. Let's dive into this review, shall we? Today we'll be looking at the Tahtorak. Now, a lot of Bionicle fans remember the Tahtorak very, very fondly because this was the winner of the Bionicle Rahi Creation Challenge, which challenged builders to create their own Rahi that could fit within the world of Bionicle and not only be featured on the cover of the Bionicle Rahi book, but also be featured in a comic featuring the Toa Metru as they battled the creature. Now, in universe, the Tahtorak is several stories high and completely towers over the Bionicle characters. In fact, the closest size comparison would be if you were to put a minifigure next to it. That's about the size of a Toa compared to this model. So, of course, this is scaled down to what it actually is in universe, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it does its job for what it is, and we're going to get into this, but the Tahtorak's main story is that essentially he's a semi-sentient Rahi. He can actually speak, and he appeared on the scene in the 2004 comics demanding an answer to a question. And this question was not known by the Toa Metru. They were very confused as to why he was there. He was in a full rage, trampling through the city, causing mass destruction, and really was only able to be stopped by transporting him to another time and place entirely, which actually happened to be Voya Nui in 2006, but that's a whole nother story altogether. This guy went on some crazy adventures, and actually, this is not actually just one creature. There are several Tahtoraks in existence, and it is said that sometimes members of Sidorak's species use them as steeds, so they actually ride these into battle. So that's kind of a fun fact. That's pretty interesting to know. And the main Tahtorak in the story, his story got resolved in a very complex way, and kind of a story serial that was only featured online, and it was a very interesting story that he went on several interesting adventures, not really relevant for this review, so we're going to skip past that mostly. And for all intents and purposes, he is a big dinosaur, or a big lizard that can speak, and that's really all you need to know for the purposes of this review. So here we go. I'll be reviewing this model on 4 basic points. Number 1 is posability. How well can you get this into good poses? Can you actually make it stand up and support its own weight, or does it keep falling over? Number 2 is just general building techniques. Did the builder use stuff that was just taken from sets, or did they actually try to put it into a cohesive model and use parts in a unique fashion? Number 3 is overall aesthetics. So how good does this look in general, and how opposing does this look as, say, a creature that could tower over the Toa Metru and cause a significant problem for Metru Nui? And number 4 is how well does it fit in universe? So does this make sense as a Rahi in the Bionicle story? Does the parts usage make sense for what it is? And in general, does this make sense as a Rahi beast at all? So we'll be kind of looking at it over these main points, and for now, let's just dive in to the Tahtorak, but you can see I'm kind of having some problems here. And, oh boy. So obviously this model is not stable, and the way that the head is attached, it's just by a Rakshi head. And you know those are meant to flip open to reveal a Crotto. They are not meant to support a weight of a build as big as this head, because there's literally no friction keeping it in. There are actually a few things, very easy things that can be done to fix this. So we're going to do that now, and I'm going to take off 4 to 5 points off of posability, because without the fixes that I am proposing, it's almost impossible to get this to stand or assume any pose with the head up, because the moment you brush the head, it just falls over. And there's a very easy way to fix this, so let's bring the camera in and take a look. Alright, if you want to fix the Tahtorak, you will need 4 pieces at a minimum to make it such that you can actually pose it and play around with it without it flopping around every few seconds. That is 3 of these CCBS, Hero Factory, whatever you call it, friction joint add-ons, and 1 very simple piece that existed at the time that it was built, which is just the Technic pin commonly used in Bionicle to adhere armor pieces. So here's what I propose. See the neck here? And see how you actually have an axle hole right here? So let's just remove some of this Technic pieces, the Technic bars here. You want to expose that Technic hole on the neck right there. So remove the head entirely. Actually, this is easier to do without the head. So you see this piece right here. We're going to want to use the Technic pin to attach it inside of this Rakshi spine to basically make it such that the neck will never flop down. As it is right now, the weight of the massive head on the neck just causes this to pop open like so. We don't want that, so we want to try to put this piece in. Now this is very simple. If we get, say, a Technic axle, just push that guy all the way through, and we can basically expose this piece and completely remove it. Now, take this Technic pin, place it in the socket there, and very simply place this on top of the Technic pin. It's not actually going to stick on or adhere, but it prevents it from actually falling forwards. It's basically just adding a stopper in there. Is this good for the Technic piece long term? Almost certainly not, but it does solve our problems, and it's a very common piece anyway, so place that in as a stopper there, and all of a sudden, you're never going to have the head fall over again because you've actually got this piece stopping it. So let's put the head back on. Put the spine back. Look, even if I purposefully push the head down, it's never going to fall down because I've put that Technic pin in. So that's step number one on how to have a much better experience while playing with the Tahtorak, something I unfortunately only realized after filming most of this review and realizing it was literally impossible to explain anything about the model with the head flopping around all the time. Number two is take the friction joint, place it on the foot, and attach the foot to the friction joint. This will do wonders in terms of posability. I'm sure most Bionicle fans have at least one or two of these hanging around, especially ones who are planning to build this themselves. There is no reason to not stick friction add-on joints to the feet. Yes, it's not technically supposed to be the canon of the model, but honestly, you're not going to be able to do anything with the model if you don't have those. Number three, the tail. Can't do anything with the tail because it just flops around. So, friction joint. Stick that on the back. And voila, you can actually stand up this model in at least a semblance of an interesting pose because the head isn't going to flop off and your legs aren't going to fall over. So let's all give a round of applause to LEGO for developing the single most useful CCBS Bionicle construction piece that I've used to greatly benefit many of these older mocks. The friction add-on joint does wonders. So thank you, LEGO, and let's get back to the review. Alright, so now that we have made those 4 very simple changes to make it such that you can actually stand this thing up, let's take a look at the Tahtorak as a mock in general. So this is the giant Titan Rahi lizard, and we're going to start off with posability. Now, starting off with the legs here, the legs can be moved, but there's only a very limited amount of things you can actually do with them to get them into a good position. You can see it just using the standard Rakshi leg configuration with Toa Nuva chest plates stacked on top of them, and they're just attached on different ball joints here and here. This kind of makes for a strange leg design, and there's not too much you can do to move this around other than just splay it out. Now, with the friction add-on with the foot, this actually works because you can actually get it into good positions. However, as the build is normally built, there is no friction add-on on the foot right here, and it often just causes it to flop backwards. Thankfully, thanks to the magic of CCBS, we no longer have that problem. So, in terms of posability with the legs, you can kind of move them forward, but then it looks kind of awkward. There's a big gap here. We can move it back, but it doesn't work out too well. There's not too many things you can do foot-wise, just because of the fact that it's very restrictive the way that this is mounted at a strange angle on the foot. So you can really only get the feet in kind of this position right here. If you wanted to get it in a walking position, maybe you could try to put one forwards and one backwards, but then it's kind of more crouching than walking. It's really up to you, whatever makes sense to you to make it look like it's walking. You can kind of get that, but it's very awkward and hard to pose. The next part, of course, is the tail, and it articulates about as well as you'd expect.
You've got literally just standard Rakshi joints right here, just used to create a semblance of a tail. And yes, please excuse the black gear here. It should have been light gray. I just didn't have a light gray one on me, and this model just wasn't worth getting another light gray gear just for that. So it is kind of interesting. You can get some gear action on the tail. It doesn't really give you anything, but for people who like kind of this greebly bits and pieces on their Bionicle mocks, you do have that. And the good thing about the tail is you can actually kind of move it around and get it into good positions with the friction joint added in. Without it, it just flops immediately to the ground. So there's that. It also has a very interesting way of contorting the torso that actually doesn't have any friction. I don't think this was intentional, but if you pick it up or move it, you'll notice that the Liwa Mata torsos here actually can be moved all the way around and up and down. So in theory, this is actually a really good way to kind of make it seem more organic, but in practice, you really can only get it crouched down like this. There's never a position that you can actually get it to stay in like this, upright. And honestly, that just to me feels more like maybe lazy design or stuff that the builder didn't necessarily account for when making this model to have it be actually sturdy or to add friction in here. It really just flops down. So you do have that. You really can only put it in one position. So in my opinion, that's not really articulation. That's just strange things that you can move around on the design. And then the other thing that you can actually move around are these very strange spike pieces. You can kind of wobble them around the Liwa Mata foot pieces here. They don't really give you anything. I guess they give you some detailing like ridges along the back, but I never quite understood what these were supposed to represent. Maybe this is supposed to be like a Spinosaurus, like a dinosaur, and you've kind of got these spines sticking out, but there's just so many things that kind of wobble around on this build. You could very easily get it pointed the wrong way. It really has no friction anywhere, so it's kind of awkward, and I have no idea why those blue Technic pins are there. I have seen them on pretty much every fan instruction. Correct me if they are not on the official model, but that's what the instructions said to do. They don't do anything. They certainly don't restrict movement at all, so I have no idea why these are there. Maybe someone in the comments knows, but honestly, they just kind of detract from the color scheme, having some weird blue stuff sticking out in the middle. Maybe the builder wanted to include some bulk here, but I don't know. I'm not really that sold. Moving on to the posability, let's try to make him stand up a little bit more here. Come on. Even with the friction joints, it's kind of difficult. He's tipping back. Okay, come on. You've got the standard arms, and this is where things also get a little bit strange. So you may notice that the claws are just flopping down. Well, that's because there's literally no friction holding the claws in here. So the best angle that you can get here is with the claws pointing all the way down, and maybe you have to kind of raise the arm up. You can move these hand pieces, but I mean, then again, they don't really do too much in terms of movement. And the best thing that you can do is just squeeze these pieces together. And this is illegal, but squeeze them together really tight. And then you can get some artificial friction where you can kind of keep the hand in one place. But then as soon as you move it around a little bit, that friction is lost because the squeezing is just weakened again. And you just get the hand flopping down again. So a very strange design for the hand here, and not one that you can actually get it into really good poses with because it just flops around with no friction. The arms are about as standard as you would think, just two kind of Mata limbs here that have been used to move the hands up and down. And the head is actually one of the things I do like about the model, and I know I've been a little bit negative on this review so far. I was a little bit frustrated with the lack of just being able to pose this thing in general, but the head is actually built pretty well, I have to say. It uses some unique pieces in unique fashions, like the Rakshi head used as a jaw here. You can see the teeth of the Rakshi head that have been really used well as a jaw. You can see the Liwa Mata hand here, which is used great as a snout to the creature. I would not have thought of using that as the front of a creature mouth. And even you can see some Borak feet used for detailing on the side. I also love the frill that's used with the air katanas back here. It kind of makes it look like a very reptilian creature. It looks like a dinosaur, but then you've got this sort of reptilian frill around the head, almost like a Dilophosaurus or something, that you can imagine maybe this was almost like there was some skin or something that kind of wraps in between these to make it kind of look like a frill around the head. That's something I really do like. And the choice of the Rakshi spine here actually fits in perfectly with the katanas here. So it does actually feel like there's good parts usage used throughout there. So moving on from posability, because I've basically discussed everything there is to talk about posability, with the exception of, obviously I mentioned this before, but I had to put the pin there in order to make the head just be able to stand up and not flop down immediately. So there is that. But moving on to building techniques. And this is where things get kind of interesting, because there's clearly a lot of thought that was put into building this, at least torso-wise. They used 4 Liwa Mata torsos, or Liwa Nuva torsos, whatnot, to achieve this kind of curved reptilian look. And that's something that's really cool to me. That's a really amazing parts usage, especially for something that's very limited and restrictive as just a torso piece. They actually use it in some really unique ways going along the spine here. So that's something that I do really like about this model. The other thing that's interesting is using the Mata foot pieces as parts to make up the spine. Again, these are not adhered well at all because they can just flop around all the time, but at least they were thinking about good parts usage. And if this was made by a kid, I'm quite impressed, because I certainly would not have been able to make this when I was just a kid. So I'll give them props for that. The Borak ribcage on the side does blend in very well with the Mata torsos, so that's another good parts usage. And I do actually like how the 2 Mata feet in the back here kind of slope down to create the tail. I think the shaping and the contours of this piece really does make it look like a large lizard and the body of a T-Rex, which I think actually does work out really well. The thing that doesn't work out very well, however, are, to me personally, the way that the legs are built and attached just feels like a bit of a letdown and maybe just not as technically involved as the body. Again, these are literally just Rakshi limbs with armor pieces slapped on, and once we get to the feet, they're kind of adhered in a semi-interesting way, and yes, this is supposed to be black, which is my mistake. I only had a green one on hand, but you can see that they've used 3 Rakshi feet to kind of give it the semblance of 3 claws, like a dinosaur. So I do think that's pretty cool. However, the way that it's attached does leave a lot to be desired, especially without the friction joint here. It's only attached to this limb piece in a very awkward manner. It's, again, pointing out to the side, so you can see that it's kind of off to the side here. And you've only got it attached on one ball joint, which, without the friction piece, causes it to just fall over all the time. So a bit of a mixed bag. The hands, on the other hand, are less of a mixed bag and just more negative in general. I don't understand why they couldn't have thought of something better to do for the hand other than just have it flop down without any friction. It's very simple in the way that it's built, just the Mata limbs kind of just attached to each other. And again, the no friction in the hand here makes it really frustrating to actually pose at all. So that is a major con to me. But again, you squeeze these together, you can kind of get it to stay in place a little bit, but I prefer not having to do that for a Bionicle build. So that is a bit of a downside to me. Overall aesthetics is, again, a little bit of a mixed bag. I love the way that the head is built. I think the head looks incredible. It looks like almost like something like a mock today would use. I like the frill that's used around it. And in general, I do kind of like the way that the torso is built. And despite this not having friction, I can kind of just see the way that you can bend this as the organic part of a beast moving around. That being said, the legs are a big letdown in terms of aesthetics. I'm not a big fan of the way that these are attached here. If you look on the other side here, you can see the tail is very, very simple, just Rakshi limbs stacked together. And if any of you have seen my review of the spiny stone ape, one of the things I really liked about it is that it used the same technique, but it actually reinforced it with Technic add-on pieces on the sides and actually caused it to be able to restrict its movement and make it seem like it flowed a lot better from the body. As it is right now, it looks like they just took a bunch of Rakshi and slapped the legs together to make a tail, which really isn't that convincing to me. So aesthetics is very mixed on this model. Things I like, though, are the fact that the Liwa Nuva blades here complement the Rakshi spine pretty perfectly, and the unique usages of the Mata torsos actually does make it look reptilian and really cool. But now we can kind of zoom out from this model and take a look at what this model looks like compared to some other representative samples and how well it fits in the universe in general.
Alright, so moving into the final point, which is how well does this fit in the Bionicle universe, I have placed the Tahtorak alongside some of its contemporaries, which include the spiny stone ape, which was also made at pretty much the same time and was also entered into the Bionicle Rahi contest and was featured in the book, And I've also placed Toa Mechi Oniwa alongside it just to give kind of a sense of scale as to how well this scales next to a Toa Mechi figure. So obviously this is completely out of scale compared to how it should look next to a Toa Mechi, but that's more LEGO's fault than the builder's fault. LEGO just depicted it as really, really large in the comics, but of course the builder had no way of knowing that. So I'll give it a bit of leeway there. It's not the model's fault that it's completely out of scale with other Bionicle creatures. So I'll just move aside Toa Mechi Oniwa here. It's not really that helpful in terms of scale. What is helpful though is to kind of put him next to the Spiny Stone Ape, which in my opinion is very similar in size, which is another canon Bionicle model, and just kind of compare how much it makes sense that this works in universe. And actually, that's probably where this model is going to get the highest points. It actually does make a lot of sense in universe. If we set aside the Spiny Stone Ape here, which is of similar stature, you can just see in general, this model uses a lot of really great pieces that evoke the original era of Bionicle. The Toa Mata torsos, it uses the Mata feet. Rakshi spines, it uses Mata limbs, Rakshi feet, Rakshi legs, a tail that's comprised of Rakshi pieces, and it's covered in pistons and Technic details, but not too much Technic such that it's overwhelming. I think that this model, the way that the parts are used, is an almost perfect blend of Technic and original G1 Bionicle parts to evoke kind of that 01-02 style. Now, of course, the creature was set during the Metru Nui saga of events, so maybe it doesn't quite fit in with that, but in general, if you were to put this alongside, say, the Toa Mata or any build that came out in 2001 to 2003, I'd believe it as part of the universe very easily. So for that, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 in terms of believability in the universe. There are a few things that do make it stand out a little bit strangely, like I still don't know why these gears and spikes are here. I'm not entirely certain that it looks perfectly great with a giant gap in between the legs, but ignoring stuff, minor stuff like that, it does fit in well with the universe because, again, it fits in well with the parts usage, the color scheme, and just in general how well it scales next to another character. Now, here's where we move on to the slightly more negative aspects. Let's just start off, get posability right out of the gate. I mean, you saw the opening to this video. It was very, very difficult to pose this guy. And I think that this could have been something that could really have been improved just by a few minor changes to the design. First of all, again, putting in literally one Technic pin that existed far before this model was built could have fixed all of your issues with stability with the head just flopping down anytime you looked at it the wrong way. Putting in maybe, I mean, obviously friction joints didn't exist, but there probably was a better way you could have used and attached the foot, especially because there's an open ball joint that isn't being used. Maybe the builder could have done some sort of support there. So a lot of cons surrounding posability. Again, you cannot move the claws around unless you actually squeeze the two pieces together. Otherwise, the claws just flop around. The tail will flop around without a friction joint. I don't actually know how they would have fixed that one. So there are a lot of cons, and the biggest one is that you simply cannot get it to stand up unless you add in those friction joints, which didn't exist at the time this model was built. And so with that, I'm going to give posability a 4 out of 10. Now this is a little bit harsh given that, again, with the friction joints and modifications, you are actually able to get it into some fun poses. You squeeze these together, you can kind of get it into some unique poses, but in the vanilla form of the model, the way the model was supposed to be built, you really can't get it into poses well at all. So that is a major knock against this build. Now in terms of building techniques, I'm a little bit more positive on this because it's a bit of a mixed bag, because I love the way that they use the Toa Mata torsos in a very unique way to make up the, well, torso of this creature. I appreciate the fact that the Liwa Nuva blades here really evoke the style of the Rakshi spine. I like the inventive parts usage of the Rakshi head used as a lower jaw here, the Liwa Mata hand or the standard Mata hand as the snout, and even the Borak feet along the side. I think the head and the torso are done pretty well. But then you get to the fact that if you look closely at the torso, you can't really kind of do anything with the articulation. It just flops around. The legs are just basically just taken from Rakshi sets with nothing special really added onto it. The tail is just Rakshi limbs stacked together. There's nothing special about the arms, and the building technique to attach the claws makes it have actively less posability and allows you to not be able to move around this hand. So bit of a mixed bag, 5 out of 10. I enjoy a lot of the head, a lot of the torso. I do not enjoy a lot of the legs and a lot of the arms. So there is that. And then we get into overall aesthetics. So I'm actually a little bit more positive on aesthetics as well. I'm going to give aesthetics a 6 out of 10 because I like the imposing stature. This does really look like a large lizard or dinosaur-like creature. The moment that I saw the 3 Rakshi feet kind of in a position here, my mind immediately went to the T-Rex, the classic T-Rex 3-clawed footprint that has been seen in many movies and media and whatnot. So it really does feel like an imposing dinosaur right here. And dinosaurs aren't really something that Bionicles really touched. We were supposed to get an entire wave of dinosaur Bionicle sets in 2010, but of course the line got canceled and that along with it. So we never actually got to see LEGO's depiction of a classic dinosaur in the Bionicle universe outside of maybe Pharaoh and Skirmix, which was kind of the prototype of that. But I'd say this does the job pretty well because the head looks really great. I love again, the building techniques of the head make it look really believable. I really enjoy the way that the spine kind of wraps around here. And for this being weird and hard to pose, I can get what the builder was going for with the gears and the spikes sticking out of the back. So I will give it that in terms of aesthetics. But then you've got the weird blue Technic pins here, which make no sense, and I have no idea why they were included. You've got a very strange way the legs are built, causing it to have massive gaps in between, and stick my whole hand in the gap here. And you've got a relatively simple tail with really no green on it that doesn't really continue the color scheme of the model sloping around. So that is a con, and that's why I'm a little bit more positive because I do like a lot of the choices that were made here. There's just a few things that weigh it down. And so in summary, what do I think about this model? Well, I think that this Tahtorak model is, of course, it's very well beloved in the community. A lot of people love the Tahtorak model, but after building it myself, I have to say that, in my opinion, honestly, it's a little bit overhyped. And when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of the Tahtorak. When Bionicle 2015 came out, I was such a big fan of the Tahtorak that I actually built my own CCBS version to stand alongside it. And I was really looking at the design influences here. I tried to give it more of maybe like a Godzilla feel or something like that. You can see that I've included some of the eye stock pieces as spines because I was very inspired by the unique uses of spines on the back. I did actually make the tail green this time because I felt the gray tail was strange, and I did try to emulate these spikes along the head as best I could and use a Hero Factory piece to simulate the jaw opening and closing. So I was very inspired by this model to the point where I don't mock too much. And the striking way that this was displayed on the cover of the Bionicle Rahi book, the way that this model was portrayed in the comics, I think that really inspired me to create a mock of my own of it. And again, I don't mock too much, so that is a big kind of compliment to this mock in general, the way that it had a really big staying power when I was a kid reading those comics with the Toa Metru battling the Tahtorak. It really influenced, causing me to create something like it in the future. If the Tahtorak were to come out today as they say a CCBS set, that was kind of my envisioning of it. But now that I've actually built the original model myself, I think that it doesn't quite hold up to what I had in mind of it as a kid. Maybe this is just due to my expectations being a little bit too high, but to me as a kid, the Tahtorak was awesome. The way that it appeared on the pages of the comics, on the cover of the Rahi book, it just looked really good the way that it was posed and how imposing it looked. And then building it itself, it was a really big letdown to find that you could barely stand it up. The legs were built really strange and awkwardly, and even with friction joints, it is still very strange looking and has some problems standing up. So, in my opinion, it's a little bit overhyped. It's still a really cool Rahi model, but personally, if I were to pick the winner of the Bionicle Rahi contest to appear in the story and appear on the cover of the book, I honestly probably would have chosen the Spiny Stone Ape. They are of similar size, except the Spiny Stone Ape is just so much more sophisticated than the Tahtorak model. It is a lot more posable. You can actually get it into really unique and cool looking poses, like even lifting up his hand. It's built a lot better. It's a very dense Technic build, but it does It makes use of the Technic parts really well. The legs, for what they are, and I did have some cons related to the legs in the review for this one, I'd say are leaps and bounds ahead of just the Tahtorak legs, which are just the Rakshi legs. And again, the tail is built very similarly, but actually uses these Technic pieces on the side to make it seem more cohesive. So if I had to pick a winner, I would have picked the Spiny Stone Ape. However, I know why it didn't win. I mean, it's a very well-known fact in the Bionicle community that the brown-colored Bionicle sets, for some reason, just don't simply, they simply don't sell as well as the other sets. And if LEGO was trying to sell a book or draw kids in with the comics, a brown creature maybe would not have been as visually appealing as a bright green, vibrant T-Rex looking creature. So I can see why this one was picked. Everything about this model in terms of build, aesthetics, and overall posability is just leaps and bounds better than this one. Although this one still does have a special place in my heart for being one of the very memorable moments of the 2004 Bionicle storyline and actually being featured in the comics themselves. So it's definitely a mixed bag here. There's a lot of good in this model, but there's also a lot of bad and a lot of questionable. And I think that I would definitely urge viewers who are looking to build this model themselves, what can you do to get inspired by this build? Of course, this was probably made by a kid all the way back in 2004, 2005, using pieces that were pretty much only from the 2001 to 2003 Toa and Rakshi sets and Borak sets. So what could you do to improve this model if you were to build it today? I tried that out with a concept myself with my own Tahtorak mock, which of course is, I mean, the color scheme is very jumbled. It's not my best mock. I mean, this was made all the way back in 2015 when G2 just launched. So it's a very basic model I built several years back, but I'd love to see if people have gotten inspired by the Tahtorak and have made revamps of it, because it had such a crucial role in the Bionicle storyline. It did a ton of things in 04 and even in 06 it appeared on Voyanui. So it's definitely a really interesting Bionicle build, and I'd love to see what people could come up with in the future if they were to be inspired by this base build, which admittedly has a lot of flaws, but I think it's the idea that counts. And having a really cool biomechanical dinosaur stalking the land is just something that's a cool concept to me. But that about sums up this review. Thank you all for tuning in. What did you think of the Tahtorak model? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you like this model? Do you have it built yourself? Or maybe if you've done a revamp of the Tahtorak or you've seen a revamp online, let me know and I'd love to check it out and maybe do another video on that as well. But thank you for tuning into Duckbricks. Stay tuned every week to a new Bionicle Fanon review, as well as regular uploads of LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks and bye-bye for now. I'll see you next time.